They laughed when the lawyer said his inheritance was just $1. But the next morning, that same lawyer drove him deep into the mountains to reveal something no one in that room was supposed to know. The room had been filled with quiet laughter when Caleb Ward was handed a single dollar bill. After everything he had done for Harold Whitmore in the old man's final years, that was all the will had left him. His ex-wife's family watched with cold smiles as he folded the bill and walked out into the cold Montana rain with only his loyal German Shepherd Atlas beside him. But less than 24 hours later, a black SUV pulled up to his cabin, and the same lawyer who read the will told him those words that would change everything. The dollar wasn't the inheritance. It was the key. What Caleb discovered next would uncover secrets buried deep in the Bitterroot Mountains and start a battle no one saw coming. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from. Drop your city, state, or country in the comments below. The conference room on the 42nd floor of Whitmore and Hale law offices smelled faintly of polished oak and expensive leather. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the gray Montana sky outside, the distant Bitterroot Mountains barely visible through the slow drifting snow. Caleb Ward sat stiffly in a high-backed chair that felt far too elegant for a man like him. His broad shoulders strained against a faded denim jacket that had seen better years. A faint scar crossed the bridge of his nose, another disappearing beneath the collar of his flannel shirt. The quiet discipline of a soldier still lived in the way he held himself, back straight, hands resting calmly on the table. At his feet, a large German Shepherd lay perfectly still. Atlas didn't move. His amber eyes calmly scanned the room, alert but patient, the way he had learned during long patrols overseas. His black and tan coat gleamed beneath the warm light of the chandelier, and every once in a while his tail tapped quietly against the carpet when Caleb's boot brushed his side. Across the table sat the Whitmore family. Natalie Whitmore leaned back in her chair with effortless confidence. Her long blonde hair fell neatly over the shoulders of a designer coat that probably cost more than Caleb's old pickup truck. Beside her sat her brother Logan Whitmore, arms crossed, his expression already halfway between boredom and amusement. The room was filled with expensive watches, tailored suits, and the faint smugness of people who had never truly struggled for anything. Caleb knew he didn't belong here anymore. 18 months earlier, he had been part of this family, married into it, trusted by it. Harold Whitmore himself had once called Caleb the only man in the room who knew what loyalty meant. But loyalty didn't mean much during a divorce. The courtroom had taken everything. The ranch house he helped build, the savings he'd earned during 15 years in the Army Rangers, even most of the furniture. By the time the lawyers were done, Caleb had walked away with little more than his truck, a duffel bag of clothes, and the one companion who had never left him, Atlas. The old man at the head of the table cleared his throat. "Shall we begin?" Daniel Reeves, senior estate attorney for the Whitmore family, adjusted his glasses and opened the thick binder in front of him. His voice was calm, practiced, the voice of someone who had read hundreds of wills before. "This is the last will and testament of Harold Whitmore." At the name, the room fell quiet. Harold Whitmore had been a legend across western Montana, a timber baron who built Whitmore Timber into one of the largest logging companies in the region. A hard man with iron discipline and a reputation for never forgetting a debt. Caleb had spent many long evenings sitting beside Harold during the last year of his life. After the cancer diagnosis, the old man had grown quiet, reflective. Sometimes the two of them sat on the porch, watching the sun fall behind the mountains. Sometimes Harold would reach down and scratch Atlas behind the ears. Best soldier in the room, the old man had once joked. Now Harold was gone, and this room was about to divide everything he had left behind. Reeves began reading. To my daughter, Natalie Whitmore. Natalie barely lifted her eyes from her phone. I leave the lakeside property in Whitefish along with an investment portfolio valued at approximately $12 million. Logan whistled softly. Natalie smiled without looking up. Reeves continued. To my son, Logan Whitmore. Logan straightened slightly. I leave controlling shares in Whitmore Timber, along with all operational authority over company holdings. Logan leaned back with a satisfied grin. Well, he murmured, that worked out nicely. Caleb remained silent. Atlas lifted his head slightly, watching Logan for a moment before lowering it again. Reeves turned the page. The reading continued for several minutes. Properties, trust accounts, investments, millions of dollars changing hands in the calm tone of legal language. Caleb listened without reaction. He hadn't expected anything. After the divorce, he had assumed the Whitmores were done with him. Finally, Reeves cleared his throat again. And now, he said, a final personal bequest. Logan smirked. Natalie folded her arms. Reeves read carefully. To Caleb Ward. For the first time, several heads in the room turned. Logan chuckled quietly. Natalie's expression hardened. Reeves continued. In recognition of his time spent assisting me during my final years, and to ensure the legal clarity of this document, he paused briefly. I leave Caleb Ward the sum of $1 United States dollar. For a moment the room was silent. Then Logan burst out laughing. Seriously? A few of the other relatives joined in, not loudly, but enough. Natalie didn't laugh. She simply looked at Caleb. The expression on her face wasn't anger. It was worse. It was pity. Reeves reached into his pocket and slid a crisp $1 bill across the polished table. It stopped directly in front of Caleb. Atlas lifted his head again. The dog looked at the bill, then at Caleb. Caleb stared at the small piece of paper. George Washington's face looked back at him calmly. $1. The room waited. Logan leaned forward. Looks like the old man really appreciated you, he said. More quiet laughter. Natalie sighed softly. Caleb, she said, her voice cool. Maybe you should frame it. Caleb didn't answer. For several long seconds he simply stared at the bill. Then slowly, calmly, he reached forward and picked it up. The paper felt light between his fingers. He folded it once, slipped it into the pocket of his jacket. Atlas rose quietly beside him. The big dog shook himself once, claws clicking softly on the hardwood floor. Caleb stood. For a moment he looked around the room. Not angry, not bitter, just tired. He reached down and rested a hand on Atlas's head. Well, he said quietly, guess that's what loyalty's worth these days. Logan chuckled again. Caleb turned and walked toward the door. No one stopped him. The elevator ride down felt longer than it should have. When the doors opened onto the street, a cold Montana wind rushed in. Snow had begun falling harder now. Caleb stepped outside. Atlas followed close beside him. The city of Missoula looked gray and distant beneath the storm clouds. For a long moment, Caleb simply stood there on the sidewalk. Then he pulled the $1 bill from his pocket again. The wind fluttered the edges of the paper. He stared at it quietly. Atlas pressed his nose gently against Caleb's hand. Caleb gave a tired half smile. Come on, partner, he murmured. He folded the bill once more and slid it back into his pocket. Together they walked down the street, disappearing into the falling snow. Neither of them knew yet that the small piece of paper in Caleb's pocket was about to unlock a secret worth $50 million. Or that by the end of the week, the people who laughed in that boardroom would wish they never had. The snow continued to fall over Missoula as Caleb and Atlas headed toward the old pickup waiting at the curb. Behind them, 42 floors above, the Whitmore family celebration had already begun. But somewhere deep in the Bitterroot Mountains, something Harold Whitmore left behind was still waiting. And Atlas, without knowing why, lifted his head and stared toward the distant mountains, as if he could already sense it. The snow kept falling as Caleb and Atlas drove out of Missoula. Caleb's old pickup rattled along the two-lane highway like it always did, the heater blowing uneven bursts of warm air that smelled faintly of dust and pine needles. The windshield wipers squeaked rhythmically across the glass, pushing away thick flakes that swirled through the headlights. Neither man nor dog spoke, though Caleb sometimes swore Atlas understood more English than most people. The mountains ahead were slowly disappearing into the storm. Caleb rested one hand on the steering wheel, while the other absent-mindedly rubbed the spot behind Atlas's ear. "Someday, huh?" he muttered. Atlas thumped his tail once against the seat. Caleb exhaled slowly and looked at the road again. He had learned something in the Army Rangers. Humiliation fades. Silence doesn't. The quiet after a mission. The quiet after a firefight. The quiet after someone doesn't come home. Those kinds of quiet stay with a man. And tonight, the quiet inside Caleb felt heavy. By the time they reached the narrow forest road leading to his cabin, the snow had turned thick and wet. The truck climbed slowly through the dark pines, tires crunching over frozen gravel. The Bitterroot Mountains surrounded him now, tall black silhouettes against a sky that looked like bruised steel. Caleb finally turned off the engine in front of the small log cabin he had been renting for the past 6 months. The place leaned slightly to one side. The porch light flickered, but it was quiet, and quiet was enough. Atlas jumped down from the truck first, landing softly in the snow before shaking his thick coat. Caleb grabbed his worn duffel bag from the passenger seat and followed. Their boots left deep prints in the snow as they walked toward the cabin door. Inside, the place smelled faintly of wood smoke and old pine boards. Caleb kicked off his boots, tossed another log into the small iron stove, and waited for the flames to catch. Atlas circled twice on the rug before settling down near the fire. For a few minutes, neither of them moved. The cabin creaked softly as wind pushed against the walls. Caleb reached into his jacket pocket. The $1 bill slid between his fingers again. He stared at it in the firelight. George Washington looked calm, unbothered, completely unaware that his face had just become the final insult of Caleb Ward's marriage. Caleb leaned back in the wooden chair and let out a quiet breath. "Guess we should be grateful," he murmured. Atlas lifted his head. Caleb held the bill up. "Could have been nothing." The dog blinked slowly. Caleb chuckled under his breath. Then the thunder rolled. It wasn't loud at first, just a low rumble across the mountains. But Caleb froze instantly. His body stiffened. The fire popped. Another roll of thunder followed, this one sharper. And suddenly, Caleb wasn't in Montana anymore. He was back in Afghanistan. Dust in the air, heat pressing against his skin, the distant crack of rifles echoing across a rocky valley. Caleb's breathing changed. Fast. Short. His hands tightened around the armrests of the chair. The storm outside grew louder. Wind struck the cabin walls. Thunder cracked again. Atlas was on his feet immediately. The German shepherd crossed the room in 2 quiet steps and pressed against Caleb's leg. Caleb's hands trembled. For a moment, he looked 20 years younger, or maybe 20 years older. Atlas nudged Caleb's arm with his nose, once, twice. Then the dog placed both front paws gently against Caleb's knees and leaned his weight forward. Caleb closed his eyes. His breathing slowly began to steady. Atlas stayed there, patient, steady, like he had done dozens of times before. Minutes passed. The storm rolled further into the mountains. Finally, Caleb opened his eyes again. The cabin returned. The fire, the smell of pine smoke, Atlas's warm breath against his hands. Caleb scratched behind the dog's ears. "Still got my 6, huh?" Atlas wagged his tail slowly. Caleb leaned forward and rested his forehead against the dog's. "Good man." Outside, the storm kept moving east. Eventually, Caleb stood and poured himself a cup of cheap coffee left over from the morning. He sat at the small kitchen table and unfolded the dollar again. He turned it over once, then again. Still just $1. Caleb smirked. "Well, Harold," he muttered, "guess you got the last laugh." He set the bill down on the table. Atlas curled up nearby. The fire burned low. For the first time in days, Caleb felt exhaustion pulling at him. He turned off the lamp. The cabin fell into darkness except for the soft glow from the stove. Snow continued falling outside. And somewhere around 6 in the morning, a set of headlights appeared through the trees. Atlas's ears snapped upright. The dog stood immediately and walked toward the door. A moment later, the sound of tires crunching over snow reached the cabin. Caleb woke slowly. Years of military training had taught him to wait quietly. Atlas gave a low, cautious rumble in his chest. Caleb stood and moved to the window. Through the frost-covered glass, he could see a black SUV parked beside the cabin. The engine was still running. A tall man stepped out. He wore a long, dark coat and a felt hat dusted with snow. Caleb recognized him instantly. Daniel Reeves, the Whitmore family lawyer. Caleb opened the door halfway. Cold mountain air rushed inside. Reeves removed his hat politely. "Mr. Ward." Caleb frowned. "It's 6 in the morning." Reeves nodded. "Yes, I'm aware." Snowflakes settled on the lawyer's shoulders as he spoke. "I apologize for arriving unannounced." Caleb crossed his arms. "Did the Whitmores send you?" Reeves shook his head slowly. "No." He looked past Caleb toward Atlas. The dog stood silently behind his owner, watching. Then Reeves spoke the words that would change everything. "The dollar you received yesterday," he said quietly, "was not an insult." Caleb raised an eyebrow. Reeves met his eyes. "It was the key." Caleb didn't move. Snow drifted between them. After a moment, Caleb asked one simple question. "The key to what?" Reeves gestured toward the mountains. "To your real inheritance." Atlas stepped forward slightly. His ears lifted again, as if he had already heard something Caleb couldn't. And somewhere deep in the Bitterroot Mountains, something Harold Whitmore left behind was still waiting. Caleb stood in the open doorway of the cabin while snow drifted quietly around Daniel Reeves. For a long moment, neither man spoke. Atlas watched the lawyer carefully, ears high, body still. the way he used to watch strangers walking toward their patrol base in Afghanistan. Reeves seemed to notice the dog's attention. "That's Atlas, correct?" the lawyer asked calmly. Caleb nodded once. "He was Harold Whitmore's favorite visitor during those last months," Reeves added. "The old man said the dog had better instincts than most executives he knew." Caleb gave a dry half-smile. "That's not a high bar." The wind shifted through the trees, carrying the smell of pine and snow. Reeves slipped a leather envelope from inside his coat. "May I come in, Mr. Ward?" Caleb hesitated only a second before stepping aside. The lawyer entered, brushing snow from his coat. Atlas followed him closely, circling once before sitting near the fireplace, where the last embers of the night's fire still glowed. Reeves placed the envelope on the table. Caleb didn't touch it yet. "You said the dollar was a key," Caleb said. Reeves nodded. "In legal terms, leaving someone a small inheritance prevents them from contesting the will." Caleb leaned against the counter. "So Harold left me $1, just to keep me quiet." "No," Reeves said calmly. "He left you $1 so the rest of the will could remain hidden." That got Caleb's attention. Reeves opened the envelope and removed a folded map. It was old. Not antique old, but worn enough that the creases had begun to crack. Pencil markings crossed parts of it, and several small red circles had been drawn along the western slopes of the Bitterroot Range. Reeves spread it across the table. "This land," he said, tapping the map, "is legally yours now." Caleb stepped closer. Atlas stood up and placed his paws beside the table, nose twitching curiously over the paper. Caleb studied the map. "It's just forest land," he said. "Half of western Montana looks like that." Reeves shook his head. "Not this section." His finger moved to one particular ridgeline. 83 acres, he continued. "Purchased quietly 7 years ago through a private holding company. No public record connects the land to Harold Whitmore." Caleb frowned. "Why hide it?" Reeves folded his hands calmly. "Because Harold expected trouble from his son." Logan Whitmore's name hung in the air. Caleb exhaled slowly. "That tracks." The lawyer nodded slightly. Harold wanted certain assets kept outside the company, out of Logan's reach. Caleb stared at the map again. "So you drove up here at sunrise to show me some land?" Reeves met his eyes. "I drove up here to take you there." Atlas's tail gave a slow wag. Caleb rubbed the back of his neck. "You realize I've got about $40 to my name and a truck that barely climbs hills." "That will not be necessary," Reeves said. Caleb raised an eyebrow. Reeves gestured toward the SUV outside. "I brought transportation." Snow continued falling as they stepped back outside. The black SUV looked massive beside Caleb's old pickup. Atlas jumped easily into the rear seat, circling once before settling in. Caleb climbed in beside him. Reeves took the passenger seat while the driver, a quiet man Caleb hadn't noticed before, pulled the vehicle onto the narrow mountain road. The heater hummed softly. For several miles, none of them spoke. The Bitterroot Mountains slowly unfolded around them as the road climbed higher. Towering pines leaned over the narrow road. Snow drifted from branches as the wind passed through. Occasionally, the forest opened just enough to reveal long valleys buried under white. Atlas watched the passing trees with steady interest. Every now and then, his ears twitched as if he heard something deep within the woods. Reeves broke the silence. "Harold trusted you," he said. Caleb stared out the window. "Didn't trust me enough to stop his daughter from taking my house." Reeves didn't argue. Instead, he said quietly, "Harold believed certain battles had to play out first." Caleb turned toward him. "That's supposed to make me feel better?" "No," Reeves said, "but it might help you understand the rest." The SUV climbed another winding ridge. Eventually, the pavement ended. The vehicle turned onto a narrow gravel road barely wide enough for one car. Snow grew deeper here, the forest thicker. After another 20 minutes, the road became little more than a trail. Finally, the SUV slowed. Ahead of them, a clearing opened in the trees. Caleb leaned forward slightly. A ranch sat in the center of the clearing, or what used to be a ranch. The main house sagged slightly to one side. Several windows were broken. The barn leaned like an old soldier who had marched too many miles. Snow covered everything. Caleb blinked. "That's it?" Reeves nodded. "This is the property." Caleb stepped out of the SUV. Cold air bit immediately at his face. Atlas jumped down beside him. The dog sniffed the air. Caleb turned slowly in a circle, taking in the view. Forest on every side. Mountains rising behind it. Silence thick enough to hear the wind sliding through the trees. Caleb shoved his hands into his jacket pockets. "Well," he said, "Harold had a sense of humor." Reeves didn't reply. Atlas had already started moving. The German shepherd trotted toward the old barn. Caleb watched him. "Atlas," he called casually. The dog ignored him. Instead, Atlas stopped in front of the barn doors. His nose lowered to the snow. He sniffed once, then again. Then he began pawing at the ground. Caleb frowned. "What are you doing?" Atlas started digging. Snow sprayed backward in fast bursts. Reeves stepped closer, watching. Caleb walked over. "Atlas, knock it off." The dog didn't stop. Within seconds, he had cleared a patch of snow and frozen dirt. Then Atlas barked sharply. Once. Twice. Caleb stepped forward and brushed the snow aside. His hand struck metal. He froze. Beneath the thin layer of dirt was a flat steel plate. Caleb scraped more snow away. A rusted handle appeared. The shape of a door slowly revealed itself. Reeves smiled faintly. "Looks like he found it." Caleb stared at the metal hatch. What exactly did Harold Whitmore build under his ranch? Reeves met his eyes calmly. "That," he said, "is what the dollar unlocks." Atlas barked again. And somewhere beneath their feet, something old, hidden, and valuable waited in the darkness below. The wind moved softly across the clearing, carrying the smell of snow and pine through the broken boards of the barn. Caleb crouched beside the steel hatch, brushing away the last of the frozen dirt with his gloved hands. The metal was thick and weathered, the edges worn smooth by time. Rust crept along the hinges, but the handle itself looked strangely clean, as if someone had opened it before. Atlas stood beside him, tail stiff, ears forward. The dog's nose hovered just inches above the metal door. He gave a low rumble deep in his chest. Caleb looked at him. "What is it, boy?" Atlas didn't bark this time. He simply stared at the hatch like a sentry guarding a gate. Daniel Reeves stepped closer. "The entrance hasn't been opened in years," the lawyer said quietly. "Harold kept it sealed after the last inspection." Caleb glanced up. "Inspection?" Reeves gave a thin smile. "You'll see." Caleb grabbed the handle and pulled. The hatch didn't move. He tried again, this time putting his weight into it. The metal groaned but remained shut. Caleb exhaled slowly and stood up. "Help me with this." Reeves knelt down beside him. Together they pulled. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the old hinges finally surrendered with a deep, grinding sound. The hatch lifted slowly, revealing a square opening cut straight into the ground. A metal ladder disappeared into darkness below. Cold air drifted upward from the hole. Atlas stepped forward instantly. "Easy," Caleb said, placing a hand on the dog's collar. The smell coming from below was strange, dry, metallic, untouched. Caleb leaned over the opening. The ladder extended about 15 feet down to a concrete floor. Dim emergency lights flickered along the walls beneath the ground. Caleb looked at Reeves. "This was under the barn the whole time?" Reeves nodded calmly. "Built in 1962. Caleb whistled quietly. "A fallout shelter?" "Originally, yes," Reeves said. "But Harold Whitmore had other plans." Caleb grabbed the ladder and tested it. Still solid. Atlas watched closely as Caleb began climbing down. Halfway down the ladder, Caleb paused. "Stay," he said quietly. Atlas waited above. Caleb reached the bottom and stepped onto the concrete floor. The underground space was larger than he expected. Far larger. The bunker stretched at least 40 feet in both directions, the ceiling reinforced with thick steel beams. Rows of storage shelves lined the walls. Old generator units hummed faintly somewhere deeper in the structure. Dim yellow lights flickered on as motion sensors detected him. Caleb turned slowly. "This place is huge." Reeves climbed down behind him. Atlas followed immediately after, landing softly beside Caleb. The German Shepherd began moving through the room, sniffing every corner with careful attention. Caleb walked deeper inside. Rows of sealed metal containers sat stacked along one wall. Emergency food supplies, water tanks, medical crates, all untouched. "This is like a military bunker," Caleb said. Reeves nodded. "Harold had it renovated 5 years ago." Caleb ran his hand along one of the steel tables. "Why?" Reeves gestured toward a large reinforced door at the back of the bunker. "Because the real inheritance isn't in this room." Atlas had already reached the door. The dog sniffed along the edges, tail moving slowly now. Caleb stepped beside him. "Another room?" Reeves reached into his coat pocket and removed a small brass key. "No," he said calmly. "A vault." Caleb raised an eyebrow. "You're telling me Harold Whitmore buried a vault under his ranch?" Reeves inserted the key into the heavy lock. "I'm telling you," he said quietly, "that Harold Whitmore never trusted his own son." The lock clicked. The reinforced door opened slowly. Inside was a smaller chamber carved directly into the rock beneath the mountain. The air inside felt colder, more still. A large steel safe sat against the far wall. Beside it rested a heavy wooden desk, and on that desk, a single envelope. Atlas stepped into the room first. The dog walked slowly around the space, sniffing the floor, the walls, the safe. Then he stopped suddenly. A faint creak sounded overhead. Caleb frowned. "What was that?" Before Reeves could answer, a rusted support panel above the doorway shifted loose. It dropped suddenly. The heavy metal plate slammed down beside Atlas with a loud crash. The German Shepherd yelped sharply. Caleb's heart jumped. "Atlas!" The dog stumbled backward, One of the falling metal brackets had clipped his front leg. Atlas limped immediately. Caleb dropped to one knee beside him. "Easy, easy." Atlas whined softly, but didn't resist as Caleb checked the injury. The cut wasn't deep, but it was bleeding. Caleb quickly tore a strip of cloth from his sleeve and wrapped it carefully around the dog's leg. Atlas licked Caleb's hand once. "You're all right," Caleb murmured. The dog wagged his tail faintly, despite the pain. Reeves stood nearby, watching quietly. "Looks like he protected you again." Caleb glanced up. "What do you mean?" Reeves nodded toward the metal panel. "If Atlas hadn't stepped into the doorway first, that bracket might have landed on your head." Caleb looked back at the fallen metal. The lawyer was right. Atlas had taken the hit. Caleb scratched gently behind the dog's ears. "You stubborn soldier." Atlas leaned into his hand. After a moment, Caleb stood again. He walked slowly toward the desk. The envelope rested alone beneath the dim bunker lights. The paper looked thick, heavy. Caleb picked it up. His name was written across the front in sharp black ink. Caleb Ward. The handwriting was strong and unmistakable. Harold Whitmore's. Caleb stared at the envelope. The bunker was silent. Atlas sat beside him. Reeves folded his hands calmly. Caleb finally asked the question hanging in the air. "What exactly did Harold Whitmore leave me?" Reeves nodded toward the letter. "Open it." Caleb broke the seal. Inside was a single folded sheet of paper. He unfolded it slowly. And as his eyes began reading the first lines, everything he thought he understood about that $1 inheritance began to change. The paper trembled slightly in Caleb's hands. The bunker lights hummed softly overhead, casting a dull yellow glow across the underground chamber. Atlas lay beside Caleb's boots, breathing slowly while Caleb finished tightening the cloth around the dog's injured leg. The letter was written in firm, deliberate handwriting. Harold Whitmore's voice seemed to echo through every line. "Caleb, if you are reading this, then the dollar did its job. You were never meant to receive it as an insult. It was the only legal way I could leave you the truth without my family tearing it apart before you had the chance to see it." Caleb's brow tightened. He kept reading. "You cared for me when no one else did. When my own children were too busy chasing boardrooms and stock prices, you were the one who drove me to my doctor appointments. You were the one who fixed the broken fence behind the house. You were the one who sat with me on the porch when the doctors told me the cancer wasn't going away. And your dog, Atlas. That dog reminded me what loyalty looks like." Caleb swallowed. Atlas lifted his head as if hearing his name. The bunker remained completely silent, except for the faint hum of the generator. Caleb continued reading. "You deserve the truth about my son. Logan Whitmore has been draining Whitmore timber for years. At first it was small. Unauthorized loans, questionable contracts, hidden offshore accounts. I hired investigators to confirm it. They brought me proof. More proof than any father would ever want to see about his own child." Caleb glanced up slowly at Daniel Reeves. The lawyer nodded once. "Everything in that letter is documented," Reeves said quietly. Caleb looked back down. By the time I discovered the full extent of Logan's actions, he already controlled most of the company's leadership. If I accused him publicly, the company would collapse overnight. Thousands of workers would lose their jobs. So I made another plan. Caleb's eyes moved faster now. Over the past 5 years, I sold several private holdings and quietly transferred $50 million into a protected trust. The funds were hidden outside the company and outside Logan's reach. The trust can only be activated by the person I named in this letter. Caleb Ward. Caleb stopped breathing for a moment. $50 million. He slowly looked up again. Reeves folded his hands. That account exists, the lawyer confirmed. Caleb stared at him. Why me? Reeves nodded toward the letter. Keep reading. Caleb lowered his eyes again. You are the only man I trust to finish what I started. But the money is not yours yet. To claim the inheritance, you must expose Logan's crimes and remove him from control of Whitmore Timber. Only then will the trust release the funds. If you fail, the money will be donated to federal investigators and the company will collapse under criminal investigation. I do not want revenge. I want justice. Caleb leaned back slightly. His mind struggled to catch up with what he was reading. Atlas shifted beside him and rested his head on Caleb's knee. Caleb absent-mindedly scratched behind the dog's ear. The letter continued. You are a soldier. I have seen how soldiers fight for the men beside them. This company employs over 4,000 people across Montana and Idaho. Loggers, drivers, mill workers, mechanics. Good people. They deserve someone who will protect them. If you choose to walk away, I will understand. But if you choose to fight, everything you need is waiting for you. Caleb slowly lowered the letter. The bunker felt even quieter now. Finally, he spoke. You knew about this? Reeves nodded. Yes. For how long? 4 years. Caleb exhaled slowly through his nose. And you didn't think to mention it while my marriage was falling apart? Reeves shook his head gently. Harold insisted the plan remain hidden until after his death. Caleb rubbed his forehead. This isn't my world, he muttered. Finance, corporate boards, legal traps. Reeves gestured toward the bunker around them. War wasn't your world either. Caleb looked at him. But you learned. Caleb didn't answer. Atlas shifted again, carefully adjusting his injured leg. Caleb noticed the dog's discomfort immediately. Easy, partner. He gently checked the bandage again. The bleeding had slowed. Atlas's tail thumped softly against the concrete. Caleb sighed and leaned back against the steel desk. Let me guess, he said quietly. There's more. Reeves nodded toward the large safe against the far wall. The letter was only the introduction. Caleb stood slowly. The safe was massive, military grade, nearly 5 feet tall with a thick rotary lock. Inside, Reeves said, is everything Harold gathered. Caleb turned the heavy wheel. The lock clicked after several turns. The door opened with a deep metallic groan. Inside were dozens of neatly labeled folders. Flash drives, hard drives, stacks of financial records. Caleb stared. This is enough to bury someone. Reeves nodded. Logan Whitmore, specifically. Caleb picked up one of the folders. The first page showed detailed transaction records. Offshore accounts, shell corporations, illegal transfers. The evidence looked overwhelming. Caleb closed the folder slowly. You're asking me to go to war with the Whitmore family. Reeves corrected him. Harold asked. Caleb walked back toward Atlas.
The dog looked up at him with calm, steady eyes. Caleb knelt down beside him.
"Remember Cobble?" Caleb murmured quietly to the dog. Atlas's ears twitched. "You dragged me out of a collapsed building that day," Caleb continued softly. "Doctors said I shouldn't have survived that blast." Atlas simply stared at him. Caleb scratched the dog's neck gently. "Guess we've been through worse missions." Reeves watched quietly from across the room. Caleb stood again. His voice sounded different now, steadier. "What's the first move?" For the first time since arriving at the ranch, Reeves allowed himself a small smile. "The team Harold assembled arrives tomorrow." Caleb frowned. "Team?" Reeves nodded. "A financial investigator and a cyber analyst." Caleb chuckled softly. "So this bunker is my new command center." "In a manner of speaking," Reeves replied. Atlas stood slowly. He tested his injured leg. Still sore, but usable. The German shepherd moved closer to Caleb's side. Reeves looked at the dog. "He'll be important too." Caleb raised an eyebrow. "He's a dog." Reeves smiled slightly. "And yet he found the bunker." Caleb looked down at Atlas. The dog stared calmly back at him. Outside, the bitter-root wind whispered across the snow-covered ranch above their heads. Somewhere far beyond the mountains, Logan Whitmore continued living his life, completely unaware that the quiet soldier he once mocked was now standing inside a hidden war room. And this time, Caleb Ward wasn't fighting for survival. He was fighting for the truth. For a long time after reading the letter, Caleb simply stood in the bunker and listened to the quiet hum of the generator. The sound reminded him of nights overseas. Nights when the base lights buzzed softly while soldiers tried to sleep before the next patrol. Atlas lay near the steel desk, his injured legs stretched carefully in front of him. The dog's breathing was steady now, but Caleb could still see the pain in the way Atlas avoided putting weight on the paw. Caleb crouched beside him. "You all right, partner?" Atlas lifted his head and thumped his tail once against the floor. "Didn't think retirement would look like this, did you?" The dog blinked slowly, calm and loyal as always. Caleb rubbed the thick fur behind Atlas's ears and stood again. Daniel Reeves had already begun organizing several folders from the safe onto the desk. The lawyer moved with quiet precision, like someone who had rehearsed this moment many times. "How long did Harold plan this?" Caleb asked. Reeves didn't look up. "Years." Caleb crossed his arms. "And you think 2 civilians and a soldier can take down a corporate empire?" Reeves closed one of the folders and looked at him. "You won't be alone." Caleb raised an eyebrow. "That what you said earlier?" Reeves nodded. "The rest of the team will arrive this morning." Caleb glanced toward the ladder leading up to the barn. Team. He let the word roll slowly through his mind. In the army, the word meant something clear. Trust. Shared risk. Shared survival. But this wasn't Afghanistan. This was Montana. And the enemy wore expensive suits. Reeves checked his watch. They should be here soon. As if on cue, Atlas suddenly lifted his head. His ears snapped forward. The German shepherd stood carefully and faced the ladder. Caleb noticed immediately. "What is it?" Atlas gave a soft, warning growl. Footsteps sounded faintly above them. Someone moving across the barn floor. Caleb instinctively stepped closer to the ladder. Years of instinct returned without thinking. Reeves calmly folded his hands. "Relax." A moment later, a voice echoed from above. "Hello? Anyone down there?" Female, strong voice. Reeves called up calmly. Come down. The ladder rattled as someone began climbing. A woman in her mid-30s appeared at the bottom. She wore a dark winter jacket and jeans, her black hair tied in a tight braid. Her eyes moved quickly around the bunker, scanning everything. Then she noticed Atlas. The dog was already watching her carefully. Well, she said, that must be Atlas. Caleb stepped forward slightly. You are? She extended her hand. Maya Torres. Caleb shook it. Caleb Ward. Her grip was firm. Former Army Ranger, she said. Caleb frowned slightly. You've done your homework. Maya shrugged. Harold Whitmore didn't hire amateurs. She turned and gestured toward the ladder. Come on down. A second person climbed into the bunker. This one younger. Mid-20s maybe. Thin build, glasses, backpack slung over one shoulder. He looked around the bunker with wide curiosity. Whoa, he whispered. This place is amazing. Maya rolled her eyes. Focus, Ethan. The young man straightened. Right, sorry. He pushed his glasses up his nose and offered a hand. Ethan Cole. Caleb shook it. Cyber analyst, Maya explained. Ethan smiled sheepishly. I break into computers for a living. Legally? Caleb asked. Usually. Atlas walked slowly toward Ethan and sniffed his backpack. Ethan froze. Is he friendly? Caleb watched carefully. Atlas sniffed once more, then wagged his tail. Ethan exhaled in relief. Good dog. Atlas returned calmly to Caleb's side. Maya glanced around the bunker. So this is the place Harold kept secret. Reeves nodded. He built it as the command center for everything you're about to do. Maya studied the stacks of financial records on the desk. Then we should get started. Caleb leaned against the wall. You already know what we're dealing with? Maya opened one of the folders. Logan Whitmore has been siphoning money out of Whitmore Timber through a series of shell companies. She slid several documents across the desk. These are only the surface transactions. Ethan dropped his backpack and opened a laptop. I've been tracking some of the offshore accounts, he said. His fingers moved quickly across the keyboard. Logan uses layered transfers to hide the money trail. But once we crack the access servers, we can expose everything. Caleb listened quietly. The conversation sounded like a foreign language. Finance, cybersecurity, corporate law. War had always been simpler. You knew who the enemy was. You knew where they were shooting from. Atlas suddenly shifted beside him. The dog's nose twitched toward the ceiling again. Caleb noticed. What is it? Atlas looked toward the ladder once more. Reeves followed the dog's gaze. Snow drifted faintly through the open hatch above. Wind moved softly across the barn. Nothing else. Still, Atlas remained alert. Caleb rested a hand on the dog's back. Easy. The German shepherd slowly relaxed. Maya had already begun sketching a diagram on a large whiteboard pulled from the storage wall. Logan's biggest weakness is timing, she said. She drew a circle around a date. Next month. Reeves nodded. The Jackson Hole Charity Gala. Caleb frowned. What's that? Reeves answered calmly. Logan's biggest public event of the year. Maya added more notes to the board. He plans to finalize a major investment deal during the gala. That deal will quietly erase several suspicious financial trails. Ethan looked up from his laptop.
If that contract gets signed, Logan's crimes become almost impossible to prove. Caleb crossed his arms again. So we stop him before that. Maya nodded. Exactly. Caleb glanced down at Atlas. The dog looked back up at him with steady eyes. For years they had fought together. Kandahar, Helmand, dust storms and roadside bombs. Now they were standing in a hidden bunker in Montana, preparing for a different kind of war. Caleb looked back at the team. So what's my job? Maya met his eyes. You know how soldiers move unseen. Caleb nodded slowly. Yeah. You and Atlas will help us gather the last pieces of evidence. Ethan smiled slightly.
And maybe scare a few security guards along the way. Caleb scratched Atlas behind the ear. Guess we're back on patrol. Atlas wagged his tail once. Outside the barn, the wind carried snow across the silent ranch. Deep in the Bitterroot Mountains, the quiet bunker had just become a battlefield. And the mission Harold Whitmore started years ago was finally beginning. Morning light filtered faintly through the broken boards of the barn above, but deep inside the bunker, time felt frozen. The air carried the smell of concrete, metal, and old paper. Caleb stood beside the large map Maya had pinned to the wall. Red circles marked locations across western Montana. Logging sites, processing mills, shipping warehouses. Whitmore Timber's empire. Atlas sat beside him, alert but calm, his bandaged leg resting carefully on the cold floor. The dog's ears moved constantly, listening to every sound that echoed through the bunker. Maya pointed to one of the red circles. Callisbel storage yard, she said. Logan's private inventory hub. Ethan looked up from his laptop. That's where the money trail gets interesting. Caleb glanced at him. How interesting. Ethan spun the screen around. Rows of financial transactions scrolled across the display. Logan's been moving timber shipments through shell companies, Ethan explained, selling inventory to fake contractors he secretly owns. The money disappears into offshore accounts. Caleb studied the screen. So he's stealing from his own company. Exactly, Maya said. She tapped the whiteboard again. But to prove it, we need physical confirmation from one of those warehouses. Caleb nodded slowly. You want us to go inside? Maya didn't hesitate. Yes. Reeves folded his hands calmly behind them. The Callisbel yard is lightly guarded. Private security, not federal. Caleb glanced down at Atlas. The German shepherd looked up as if he already understood. Caleb knelt and checked the bandage on the dog's leg. You sure you're ready, partner? Atlas wagged his tail once. Carefully, he stood. The injured leg still carried a slight limp, but the dog held his posture proudly. Caleb scratched the fur along his neck. Still tougher than most soldiers I know. Ethan smiled from across the room. Does he really understand you? Caleb shrugged. Sometimes I think he understands more than people do. 2 hours later, the black SUV rolled quietly along a narrow road outside Callisbel. Snow dusted the surrounding fields. The storage yard sat at the edge of a frozen logging site, surrounded by tall stacks of timber and long metal warehouses. Caleb watched the entrance through binoculars. 2 guards. A single security truck parked near the gate. Maya sat beside him in the passenger seat. Looks quiet, she said. Caleb lowered the binoculars. Too quiet. Atlas sat upright in the back seat, staring through the window at the distant fence. The dog's ears twitched. He could already smell unfamiliar people. New territory.
Caleb reached back and scratched the dog's shoulder. "Stay sharp." The SUV stopped behind a row of tall pines overlooking the yard. Ethan's voice crackled through the radio from the bunker. "Security cameras are minimal. 2 active feeds." Maya checked her watch. "Shift change in 15 minutes." Caleb nodded. "That's our window." Atlas stepped out of the SUV beside him, nose low to the ground. The cold air carried the scent of diesel fuel, wood, and human footprints. Caleb crouched beside the dog. "You remember training?" Atlas looked back at him. The dog's eyes were calm, focused. Years ago in Afghanistan, Atlas had learned to move silently beside Caleb through dark villages and rocky hills. Now they moved the same way through snow-covered Montana. They approached the outer fence quietly. Atlas slipped beneath a small gap where the wire had loosened.
Caleb followed seconds later. The yard stretched wide and silent ahead of them. Stacks of timber rose like walls on both sides. Maya remained in the SUV, watching through binoculars. Caleb moved quickly between the stacks. Atlas stayed close, occasionally pausing to sniff the air. At the far end of the yard stood the warehouse Maya had marked. Lights glowed faintly inside. Caleb pressed himself against the wall and peered through the window. Inside, 2 workers sorted paperwork at a desk. Beyond them were rows of crates labeled with shipment numbers. Caleb whispered softly, "Atlas." The dog looked up. "Check." Atlas slipped silently around the side of the building. Caleb watched him disappear behind the corner. Moments later, Atlas returned and nudged Caleb's hand. "Clear." Caleb slipped inside through a partially open side door. The smell of fresh-cut timber filled the warehouse. He moved quietly between the stacks of crates. Each box carried the Whitmore Timber logo, but several crates had different markings. Private shipping codes. Exactly what Maya suspected. Caleb pulled out his phone and photographed the labels. Shipping manifests. Serial numbers. Evidence. Atlas suddenly froze beside him. The dog's ears lifted sharply. Caleb heard it a second later. Footsteps. 2 guards entering the building. "Hey," one of them said. "Thought I heard something." Caleb crouched behind a crate. Atlas pressed silently against the floor beside him. The guards moved deeper into the warehouse. Flashlights swept slowly across the rows. Caleb waited, every muscle steady. Atlas didn't move. 1 guard walked closer. 10 feet. 5. The flashlight beam passed directly across Atlas's face. The guard frowned. "What the?" Before he could finish, Atlas sprang forward. The German Shepherd barked once, loud and sharp. The guard stumbled backward in shock. Caleb moved instantly, pulling the man aside and lowering him to the floor without serious harm. The second guard shouted from across the warehouse, "Hey!" Footsteps rushed toward them. Caleb grabbed Atlas's collar. "Time to go." They sprinted for the door. The second guard fired a warning shot into the air. The echo exploded through the warehouse. Atlas suddenly jerked sideways. A grazing bullet struck the dog's shoulder. Atlas yelped but kept running. Caleb's heart nearly stopped. "Atlas!" The dog pushed forward despite the pain. They burst out of the warehouse and sprinted across the yard. Maya slammed the SUV door open as they approached. "Get in!" Caleb lifted Atlas into the back seat. The SUV roared away as security alarms began blaring behind them. Caleb knelt beside the dog, pressing a cloth against the bleeding shoulder. Atlas whimpered softly, but stayed still. "You're all right," Caleb whispered. "You're all right." The German shepherd licked Caleb's hand. Maya glanced back from the driver's seat. "Did you get the evidence?" Caleb nodded. "Enough to start a war." Outside the window, the Callisbel yard disappeared behind them. But the quiet investigation was over now. Logan Whitmore's empire had just fired its first shot. And Caleb Ward knew one thing for certain. This mission was no longer just about truth. Now, it was personal. The SUV sped through the narrow mountain highway as snow began falling harder across the Bitterroot Valley. Inside the vehicle, the tension was thick enough to feel. Caleb sat in the back seat with Atlas lying across his lap. Blood had soaked through part of the cloth wrapped around the dog's shoulder, but the bleeding had slowed. Atlas's breathing was steady, though each breath carried a faint tremor of pain. Caleb kept one hand pressed gently against the wound. "You're all right," he whispered again, his voice low and calm. The dog's ears flicked slightly at the sound of his voice. Atlas lifted his head and nudged Caleb's hand. Even injured, he still tried to reassure his handler. Maya drove quickly but carefully through the winding road. "You're both lucky," she said without looking back. "That guard wasn't aiming to kill, just scare you off." Caleb didn't respond. His focus stayed on Atlas. The SUV headlights cut through thick curtains of snow as they climbed higher into the mountains. By the time they reached the hidden ranch, the storm had grown into a full winter blizzard. Wind howled through the trees. Snow slammed against the sides of the barn like waves hitting a ship. They carried Atlas down into the bunker immediately. The warmth of the underground shelter wrapped around them as the heavy hatch closed overhead. Ethan looked up from his laptop. "Whoa, what happened?" Maya tossed her coat aside. "Warehouse security got jumpy." Ethan's eyes widened when he saw the blood on Atlas's fur. "Oh, man." Caleb laid the dog gently on one of the steel tables. "First aid kit," he said calmly. Ethan rushed to a nearby cabinet and returned with medical supplies. Caleb worked with steady hands. Years of battlefield medicine returned without hesitation. He cleaned the wound carefully. The bullet had only grazed Atlas's shoulder, slicing through fur and skin, but missing bone and muscle. Painful, but survivable. Atlas didn't struggle. He simply watched Caleb with quiet trust. "You've had worse," Caleb murmured. The dog blinked slowly. After bandaging the wound properly, Caleb finally stepped back. Atlas carefully shifted his weight and lay down again. His tail tapped gently against the floor. "You're tough," Maya said softly, watching from across the room. Caleb gave a small nod. "He always has been." Ethan looked at the photos Caleb had taken from the warehouse. "These shipping labels are gold," he said. "They connect Logan directly to the shell companies." Maya leaned over his shoulder. "With these records and the digital accounts Ethan already found, we can prove fraud." Caleb leaned against the wall. "So what happens next?" Maya turned toward the large whiteboard again. "The gala." Caleb remembered the name. Jackson Hole. She nodded. "That's where Logan plans to finalize his biggest investment deal. Once that contract is signed, he'll move the stolen money through international partners." Ethan added quietly, "After that, the evidence trail disappears." The bunker grew silent. Caleb glanced down at Atlas again. The dog had closed his eyes now, resting after the pain. Snow hammered the roof of the barn above them. Reeves spoke quietly. "The gala is in 5 days." Caleb rubbed his chin. "Then we've got 5 days to prepare." The storm outside grew louder. Wind howled through the mountains like a distant animal. Hours passed. Night fell across the Bitterroot Range.
Inside the bunker, the team worked beneath steady yellow lights. Ethan traced financial records. Maya built timelines. Reeves organized legal documents. Caleb sat beside Atlas. The dog slept deeply now. Every so often, Caleb reached down and rested his hand on Atlas's back, feeling the slow rhythm of the dog's breathing. The quiet moment stirred something in Caleb's chest. Memories he hadn't thought about in years. Long desert nights overseas. The sound of helicopters far above dusty mountains. Atlas lying beside him inside a military tent after patrol. Back then, they had depended on each other to survive. Nothing had changed. The hours stretched past midnight, then past 2 in the morning. Eventually, Maya stood and stretched her shoulders. "We've got enough," she said. Ethan nodded. "Logan's network is bigger than we thought." Reeves looked toward Caleb. "The final confrontation will happen at the gala." Caleb nodded slowly. "Public exposure." "Exactly," Maya said. "Logan built his reputation on power and influence."
If the truth comes out in front of investors, board members, and the media, he loses everything instantly. Caleb glanced again at Atlas. The dog opened one eye. Caleb smiled faintly. "One more mission, partner." Atlas lifted his head weakly, but wagged his tail once. Outside the bunker, the storm continued raging across the Bitterroot Mountains. Snow buried the ranch in white silence. But beneath that quiet snow, a plan was forming. And 5 days from now, in a glittering ballroom hundreds of miles away, Logan Whitmore's empire would begin to collapse. The snowstorm that had buried the Bitterroot Ranch slowly faded over the next few days, leaving the mountains quiet and bright beneath a pale winter sun. Inside the bunker, the team worked without pause. Maya built the final timeline of Logan Whitmore's financial crimes, every stolen dollar traced through a maze of companies and accounts. Ethan cracked encrypted servers and pulled documents Logan believed were untouchable. Reeves assembled the legal framework that would make the evidence impossible to ignore once it was revealed. And Caleb prepared in the only way he knew how, like a soldier before a mission. Atlas lay beside him each night, recovering steadily from the wound in his shoulder. The bandage was smaller now, the fur around it trimmed carefully so the injury could heal cleanly. The dog still limped slightly, but the fire in his eyes had never faded. On the 5th morning, Caleb stepped out of the ranch house and looked across the white fields stretching toward the Bitterroot Mountains. Atlas stood beside him, the cold air rising from the dog's breath like smoke. "You ready?" Caleb asked quietly. Atlas wagged his tail. The drive to Jackson Hole took most of the day. The SUV followed long highways across Montana and Wyoming, passing frozen rivers and quiet forests. As evening approached, the mountains gave way to a valley glowing with golden lights. Jackson Hole. Luxury hotels rose against the snowy skyline, their windows shining warmly in the winter night. Maya adjusted her coat in the front seat. "This place is full of billionaires tonight." Ethan stared out the window. "And one criminal who doesn't know his life is about to explode." Caleb looked down at Atlas. The dog sat calmly in the back seat, wearing a simple black harness that hid the small scar on his shoulder. "Stay close tonight," Caleb whispered. Atlas nudged his hand. The SUV stopped outside the Grand Summit Hotel. Valets hurried between expensive cars while guests in elegant coats stepped beneath the tall glass entrance. Inside, the ballroom shimmered with crystal chandeliers. Soft music drifted through the air, Hundreds of guests filled the room: investors, executives, politicians, and reporters. At the center of it all stood Logan Whitmore. Tall, confident, dressed in a flawless black tuxedo. He laughed easily with the people surrounding him, raising a glass as cameras flashed. From across the room, Caleb watched. Maya stood beside him. "Still the same man you remember?" she asked quietly. Caleb studied Logan's smile. "Yeah," he said. "Exactly the same." Atlas sat calmly at Caleb's side, drawing curious glances from nearby guests. A few people whispered to each other about the large German shepherd calmly attending a black-tie gala. Logan finally noticed. His smile faded slightly when he saw Caleb. For a moment, the two men simply stared at each other across the crowded room. Then Logan chuckled and walked toward him. "Well," Logan said loudly enough for others to hear, "if it isn't my favorite ex-brother-in-law." A few guests turned to watch. Logan glanced down at Atlas. "You brought the dog to a charity gala?" Caleb didn't react. Logan leaned closer. "I heard about the warehouse incident," he whispered. "Security said someone broke in." Caleb met his eyes calmly. "Funny thing about secrets," Caleb said quietly. "They eventually come out." Logan laughed again and turned away. "Enjoy the party," he said. The ballroom lights dimmed slightly as the evening program began. Logan stepped onto the stage. The room fell silent. "Ladies and gentlemen," Logan began confidently, "tonight we celebrate a new chapter for Whitmore Timber." Applause echoed through the ballroom. Behind the stage, Maya glanced at Ethan. "You ready?" Ethan nodded. "Servers are patched into the hotel network." Caleb watched Logan speak to the crowd. His voice filled the ballroom with practiced charm. "For generations, our company has supported communities across the Northwest." Atlas suddenly stood. His ears lifted sharply. Caleb noticed. "What is it?" The dog stared toward the stage. Logan continued speaking. "And tonight, we finalize a partnership that will take Whitmore Timber into the future." Maya touched Caleb's arm. "Now." Ethan pressed a key on his laptop. The giant screens behind Logan flickered. Logan paused mid-sentence. The projection behind him changed. Financial documents appeared. Wire transfers, shell companies, bank statements. The crowd murmured in confusion. Logan turned around slowly. His confident smile vanished. "What is this?" he demanded. Maya stepped forward beside Caleb. Her voice carried clearly across the silent ballroom. "This is the truth about Whitmore Timber." Guests gasped as more documents filled the screens. Millions of dollars traced through Logan's secret accounts. Illegal transactions. Fraud. Logan's face turned pale. "This is fake," he snapped. "Someone shut those screens down." Ethan spoke calmly through Maya's earpiece. "They can't." Maya addressed the room. "These records have already been transmitted to federal investigators." The ballroom erupted into chaos. Reporters rushed forward. Board members whispered in shock. Security guards hesitated, unsure what to do. Logan stared at Caleb across the room. His voice dropped to a cold whisper. "You think you've won?" Caleb walked slowly toward the stage. Atlas moved beside him. The ballroom parted as people stepped aside. Caleb reached the stage and looked up at Logan. Then he placed something on the podium. A single dollar bill. The same one from the lawyer's office. Logan stared at it. Caleb's voice was quiet but steady. Not everything that looks worthless, he paused, is. Across the ballroom, police officers entered through the main doors. The night that had begun as Logan Whitmore's celebration had just become the beginning of his fall. For several seconds, the ballroom stood frozen in stunned silence. Then everything erupted at once. Voices rose across the crowd. Investors shouted questions. Reporters rushed toward the stage, cameras flashing in rapid bursts of light. Hotel security looked around in confusion as the giant screens behind Logan Whitmore continued displaying page after page of financial evidence. Bank transfers, shell corporations, illegal contracts, millions of dollars hidden behind a maze of false companies. Logan Whitmore stared at the screens like a man watching his own reflection shatter. "This is fabricated!" he shouted. His voice cracked through the ballroom. "Someone turn that off!" But the screens continued scrolling. Ethan's quiet voice came through Maya's earpiece. "Everything's locked in the system. They can't shut it down." Across the room, police officers and federal investigators began moving through the crowd. The elegant charity gala had transformed into something entirely different. An investigation scene. Logan turned slowly toward Caleb again. His confident smile was gone now. All that remained was anger. "You planned this," Logan hissed. Caleb didn't respond. Atlas stood calmly beside him, watching the chaos with steady eyes. Maya stepped forward beside Caleb and addressed the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said clearly, "The documents displayed here confirm a pattern of financial fraud within Whitmore Timber." The room erupted again. Board members whispered to one another. Investors stared at the screens with pale faces. Several executives quickly moved toward the exits. Logan slammed his hand against the podium. "This is sabotage." He pointed at Caleb. "That man broke into my company property." Caleb finally spoke. His voice was calm. "You mean the warehouse where you hid stolen timber inventory?" Logan's jaw tightened. More police officers reached the stage now. One of them spoke firmly. "Mr. Whitmore, we need you to step down from the podium." Logan looked around the ballroom. The room that had been filled with admiration only minutes earlier now held nothing but suspicion. Cameras, whispers, doubt. He looked back at Caleb. "You think this proves anything?" Caleb simply nodded toward the screens. "That's only the beginning." Maya handed a tablet to one of the federal investigators. "Full digital records have already been transferred," she said. "Every account." The investigator nodded. Logan's face drained of color. Behind the stage, several members of the Whitmore Timber Board had gathered in a tight circle. They watched the evidence quietly. Finally, one of them stepped forward. An older man with silver hair and a sharp suit. "Logan," he said slowly. Logan turned toward him. "We need to talk." The board member looked directly at Caleb. "Mr. Ward," he said calmly, "Harold Whitmore's trust gives you controlling authority over emergency financial restructuring." Logan's head snapped back toward them. "What?" The board members spoke clearly for the entire room. "The company cannot survive this scandal without immediate leadership change." He paused. "The board is transferring operational control of Whitmore Timber to Caleb Ward, effective immediately." The words fell like thunder through the ballroom. Logan stared in disbelief. "You can't be serious." The board member didn't blink. We are very serious. Logan laughed bitterly. You're handing my company to him? Caleb reached into his pocket. He removed the same $1 bill that had started everything. Slowly, he placed it on the podium in front of Logan. The paper looked almost fragile beneath the ballroom lights. Your father knew exactly what he was doing, Caleb said quietly. Logan stared at the bill. His voice dropped to a whisper. He hated you. Caleb shook his head. No. He glanced around the room. He hated what you turned this company into. The federal investigators stepped closer. Mr. Whitmore, one of them said calmly, we're going to need you to come with us. Logan looked one last time at the screens filled with his own crimes. The empire he had built was collapsing in front of hundreds of witnesses, and there was nothing left he could do to stop it. Security escorted him away through the stunned crowd. The ballroom slowly fell into an uneasy silence. Cameras continued flashing. Reporters began shouting questions toward Caleb. Mr. Ward, what happens to Whitmore Timber now? Will the company survive? Caleb didn't answer. He simply knelt down beside Atlas. The German shepherd looked up at him. Caleb scratched gently behind the dog's ear. We did it, he murmured. Atlas wagged his tail once. Across the ballroom, Maya and Ethan exchanged tired smiles. Reeves stood quietly near the wall, watching the final stage of Harold Whitmore's plan unfold exactly as the old man had intended. Outside the hotel windows, snow had begun falling softly across Jackson Hole. The same quiet snow that covered the Bitterroot Mountains far away. But for Caleb Ward, the long fight that began with humiliation in a lawyer's office had finally ended in justice. Spring arrived slowly in the Bitterroot Mountains. The heavy snow that had once buried the ranch melted into quiet streams that ran through the fields. Pine trees stood bright and green again, and the long silence of winter gave way to birdsong and the distant sound of running water. 6 months had passed since the night in Jackson Hole, and everything had changed. The old ranch that once looked abandoned now felt alive. New fences stretched across the fields. The barn had been repaired. Fresh wood panels replaced the broken boards, and the steel hatch leading to the bunker remained hidden beneath a newly reinforced floor. The property had become something entirely different. A training center. On a warm morning, Caleb stood near the edge of the field watching a group of men work with several young German shepherds. Some of the men moved slowly, their bodies carrying old injuries. Others paused occasionally, their eyes drifting far away for a moment before they returned to the present. Veterans. Men who had come home from wars that didn't end when the battlefield disappeared. Caleb understood them better than anyone. Atlas ran across the field toward him. The dog moved strong again now. The scar on his shoulder remained visible beneath the thick fur, a permanent reminder of the night in Callisbel. But the wound had healed. Atlas skidded to a stop beside Caleb and sat proudly. You showing off again? Caleb asked. Atlas wagged his tail. Across the field, a younger veteran struggled to guide a nervous dog through a simple training exercise. The dog kept pulling away. The man's frustration began to show. Caleb walked toward them. Atlas followed calmly beside him. You're holding the leash too tight, Caleb said gently. The young veteran looked up, embarrassed. Sorry. Caleb shook his head. Don't apologize. He knelt beside the dog. They feel what you feel, Caleb continued. If you're tense, they get tense. Atlas stepped forward and nudged the nervous dog gently. The younger dog sniffed Atlas and slowly relaxed. Caleb smiled. See? The veteran laughed quietly. Guess Atlas is the real trainer here. Caleb stood again. He's been doing it longer than I have. Beyond the field, the ranch house door opened. Maya stepped outside holding a stack of papers. "You've got visitors," she called. Caleb turned. 2 pickup trucks had pulled into the long dirt driveway. Men climbed out slowly, looking around the ranch with uncertain expressions. More veterans. Reeves stepped out of the house behind Maya. "The program keeps growing," the lawyer said quietly. Caleb nodded. The Whitmore timber scandal had shaken the entire region months earlier. Logan Whitmore now faced a long federal trial, but the company itself had survived. Caleb had honored Harold Whitmore's final request. Whitmore Timber had been rebuilt from the inside. New leadership, transparent operations. The thousands of workers Harold once worried about still had their jobs. And the $50 million trust Harold had hidden years before had been used exactly as he intended. Part of it saved the company. The rest built this ranch, a place where veterans could heal with the help of dogs who understood loyalty better than most humans ever would. Caleb watched as the new arrivals stepped slowly toward the training field. Many of them looked lost, the same way Caleb had once felt. Atlas trotted forward to greet them. One of the veterans knelt down as the German Shepherd approached. Atlas gently placed his head against the man's shoulder. The veteran closed his eyes for a moment. Sometimes healing began with something that simple. Caleb leaned against the wooden fence and watched quietly. For the first time in years, his chest felt lighter. The war inside his mind had grown quieter. Not gone, but quieter. Reeves stood beside him. "Harold would have liked this," the lawyer said. Caleb nodded. "Yeah!" Atlas ran back across the field and stopped beside him again. Caleb rested his hand on the dog's head. "Looks like we found our next mission," he said softly. Atlas wagged his tail. The Bitterroot Mountains rose tall behind the ranch, their peaks still dusted with the last snow of winter. The land that once held secrets and buried bunkers had become something far more important. A place where broken soldiers could stand again. And in the middle of it all, a loyal dog who never left his partner's side. Late afternoon sunlight stretched across the Bitterroot Valley, turning the tall grass gold as the wind rolled gently through the ranch. The day's training had ended. The veterans had returned to the cabins scattered along the far edge of the property. A quiet calm settled over the land as evening slowly approached. Caleb stood on the wide wooden porch of the ranch house. Atlas lay beside him, head resting between his paws, watching the open field with patient eyes. From this spot, Caleb could see nearly the entire property. The repaired barn, the long training field, the small cabins where the veterans stayed during their programs. 6 months earlier, this land had been silent and abandoned. Now it carried life, purpose. The screen door behind him creaked softly. Maya stepped onto the porch, holding 2 mugs of coffee. She handed one to Caleb. "You've been standing here a while," she said. Caleb took the mug and nodded toward the field. "Just thinking." Maya followed his gaze. Atlas suddenly stood up. 2 children from the nearby town ran across the field, chasing a young German Shepherd puppy that had just begun its training weeks earlier. The puppy bounced clumsily through the grass. Atlas watched them with calm interest. Then he trotted down the porch steps and joined the game. The children laughed as the big dog ran circles around the puppy, guiding it gently away from the fence. Maya smiled. "He's good with them." Caleb nodded. Atlas always knew when someone needed help. The wind carried the faint sound of laughter across the field. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Maya looked at him. Reeves told me the company board voted again last week. Caleb raised an eyebrow. And? They want you to remain chairman permanently. Caleb chuckled softly. I spent 20 years learning how to clear buildings and patrol mountains. He took a sip of coffee. Still not sure how I ended up running a lumber company. Maya shrugged. Harold saw something in you. Caleb glanced toward the mountains. I think he just saw someone who wasn't afraid to stand up to his son. Maya leaned against the porch railing. Either way, you saved the company. Caleb looked back across the ranch. And the ranch saved me. Atlas returned from the field and climbed the porch steps again. The big dog sat beside Caleb, tail sweeping slowly across the wooden boards. Caleb reached down and scratched behind his ears. You tired? Atlas yawned. From inside the house, Reeves appeared carrying a small wooden frame. I thought you might want this, he said. Caleb turned. Reeves handed him the frame. Inside it, behind clear glass, was the same dollar bill Caleb had received in the lawyer's office months earlier. The paper looked small now, almost ordinary. But Caleb understood its value better than anyone. Reeves spoke quietly. Harold believed symbols mattered. Caleb studied the bill. That dollar changed everything. Reeves nodded. And now it belongs here. Caleb walked inside the house and hung the frame on the wall above the fireplace. The evening light from the window fell across the glass, illuminating the small green bill. Atlas walked inside and settled beside the hearth. Outside, the last sunlight touched the peaks of the Bitterroot Mountains. The same mountains that had watched the beginning of Caleb's fall and the beginning of his rise. Caleb stood quietly for a moment. He thought about the lawyer's office, the laughter, the humiliation, the moment he had walked out holding nothing but a single dollar. He smiled faintly. Sometimes, the smallest things carried the greatest weight. Atlas lifted his head and looked at him. Caleb knelt beside the dog and wrapped an arm around his thick neck. Good work, partner, he whispered. Atlas's tail thumped gently against the floor. Outside, the ranch lights flickered on one by one. The training field glowed softly under the evening sky. And somewhere in the distance, the laughter of veterans and children echoed across the land. The ranch had become more than just property. It had become a place of second chances, for soldiers, for broken lives, and for a man who once believed his life had ended the day he lost everything. Caleb looked once more at the framed dollar above the fireplace. It had never really been about money. It had been about something far more valuable. Trust, loyalty, and the quiet strength of a soldier and his dog, standing side by side when the world turned its back. If this story touched your heart, I'd love to hear from you. Just drop a simple comment below. Type 1 if you believe loyalty like Atlas showed still exists in this world. Or type 0 if you think stories like this remind us what real courage looks like. You don't need to write anything long. Just a single number lets me know you were here watching with us. And if you enjoy stories about brave veterans, loyal dogs, and second chances in life, make sure you subscribe to the channel, because the next story is already waiting, and it might be even more powerful than this one. So stay with us. More incredible stories are coming soon.